Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the February 2025 UCLA Tarjan English Lecture. I'm Dr. Liz Laugesen, Executive Director of the Tarjan Center, which, as many of you know, is a university center of excellence in developmental disabilities. And I'd like to welcome you to our monthly lecture series on behalf of the Tarjan Center faculty and staff, and along with our co-sponsors, the UC LEND program, the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment, and the UCLA Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center. Now, like all of our lectures, this training and the information highlighted is intended solely to provide education and raise awareness about the rights and concerns of people with developmental disabilities, their families, and the people and professionals who support them. So in this lecture in particular, the aim is to ensure that people are informed and prepared to engage in thoughtful dialogue and advocacy regarding disability policies. This training is part of our ongoing commitment to provide advocacy and capacity building for people with disabilities to have their access to the needed community services and individualized supports, and also other forms of assistance to promote their own self-determination, independence, productivity, and community integration. So I'm excited to introduce you to our speakers, but just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you'd like to use the captions feature of Zoom, for English, you'll go to the Zoom toolbar and select captions. Then in caption language, select English. For captions in languages other than English, on your Zoom toolbar, look for the show captions and click on the up arrow, then select translation at the top and click my caption language to choose your preferred language. Now, throughout this lecture today, you're welcome to enter your questions for our speakers into the Q&A on the Zoom toolbar, and we will be facilitating a discussion at the end of the presentation. After today's lecture, we will also be hosting from 1 to 1:30 Pacific Time our UCLA Tarjan Center Research and Resource Exchange. This is an optional opportunity for our attendees to learn about research studies and community resources from our faculty and staff. So today, Summer Rose Perry will be sharing a few research opportunities. Summer is a research associate in Dr. Connie Kasri's lab at the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment. And she'll be sharing information about the EMERGE study, which stands for Early Markers of Expressive and Receptive Language. So our audience will be able to ask questions of Summer and learn how to get involved with this important study. So we hope you'll enjoy it, that extra bonus today, and join us for the research and resource exchange after our distinguished lecture. So we also hope that you will complete our evaluation survey at the end of today's lecture to provide feedback and suggestions for future lectures. The link to this evaluation survey will be sent to you in the chat today, as well as in a follow-up email this week. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. So today we have Dr. Jasper Estabillo, who you may recognize as the host of our Distinguished Lecture Series. She is also the Director of Training at the UCLA Tarjan Center and a psychologist in the UCLA Mattel Children's Hospital Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics Program. So Dr. Estabillo has worked with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families in a variety of research and clinical settings. And she has extensive experience in training clinicians in evidence-based and behavioral and mental health interventions. Her work focuses on providing direct clinical services to families, improving clinical training, and also expanding access to interventions into communities. Dr. Blake Warner is also joining us today. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, where he works with youth with developmental disabilities and their families through the UCLA Peers Clinic and the UCLA Tarjan Center. So Dr. Warner received his PhD with a dual specialization in clinical psychology and disaster psychology from the University of South Dakota, where he was a two-time trainee with the Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities, or LEND program. And Dr. Warner's research and clinical interests center on disability-related policy and advocacy training, as well as interventions focused on the intersection of gender, sexuality, and neurodiversity. So today, Dr. Estabillo and Dr. Warner will be sharing their insights about telling your story through the UCLA Leadership Academy for Emerging Disability Rights Leaders. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to our speakers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lageson, for that warm welcome. Dr. Warner and I are thrilled to be able to present to our audience today and talk about our Leadership Academy, which I think many of us who are involved in this project say that it's one of our pet projects. So we're very, very happy to have the opportunity to share. In addition to our very nice bios that Liz just gave us, Dr. Warner and I also wanted to just do some quick introductions to orient us into what our rules were with the Leadership Academy. So in addition to my work that was included in my bio for the Leadership Academy, I provided primarily mentorship and supervision for our coaches and our fellows, and did a lot more work on the back end for our research, which we'll be talking about today. And then I'm going to hand things over to Blake to do a quick little introduction as well.
Thank you, Jasper. Yes, in addition to my wonderful introduction from Dr. Lageson, with the Leadership Academy specifically, I worked a lot with our individuals with lived experience, who you'll learn about just in a few moments here, along with our curriculum development. And I also led a lot of the program, so a lot of the lessons I co-led with our individuals with lived experience. So excited to tell you more about that in just a little bit here.
Thank you, Blake. We also wanted to acknowledge for Dr. Warner and myself as researchers without intellectual and developmental disabilities, we do recognize that our experiences and perspectives are different than many of those who we work with. We are committed to centering the experiences of individuals with disabilities in our work, and our goal is really to conduct research that's respectful, inclusive, and focused on the needs of the disability community, while also being mindful of the privilege and limitations of our own experiences. So thank you all for being here and for listening to some of our work. So our agenda today, I'll start things off by talking through background and our needs assessment. Then we'll get into collaboration strategies, cover the pilot data from our first cohort of the Leadership Academy, and then wrap things up on thoughts for future directions. Our learning objectives for today are: one, to understand individuals with lived experiences, perspectives, and priorities about leadership curriculum. Two, to learn strategies for collaborating with individuals with lived experience to create a leadership curriculum. And three, really to describe results from our pilot data of the Leadership Academy. So to start us off, why do we need a Leadership Academy for individuals with disabilities? Well, by way of background, progress in the disability rights movement really is largely due to the work of advocates with disabilities. And throughout our talk, you'll hear both Dr. Warner and I refer to individuals with disabilities as individuals with lived experience. So a lot of the work in the disability rights movement is really because of boots on the ground work of individuals with lived experience. Federally, we also have the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act, or the DD Act. And this is a federal law that makes sure that people with disabilities and their families both help design community services and have access to services, supports, and assistance. So really making sure that people with disabilities know that they are important and frankly critical to help shape the policies that impact them the most. Under the DD Act, it really mandates that services should promote the self-determination, independence, productivity, integration, and inclusion of individuals with disabilities into all parts of community life. So this act really makes sure that people with disabilities and their families are, really, really integrated into the work that impacts their everyday lives. Here at the Tarjan Center, we or a UCED, which is a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. And we act as a bridge between academic research and the community. For those of you who attended Dr. Warner's talk in September on UCEDs, you might remember that our role is really important in being able to act as a bit of a liaison between academic research and policy, clinical work, and community-facing activities. So bringing it back to our question, why do we need a Leadership Academy for individuals with disabilities? Well, to teach people with lived experience how to advocate for themselves and their communities. There is a well-known saying in the disability community, nothing about us without us. And here in our work, we are very much in support of that. So we really want to make sure that we are giving people and listening to the voices of individuals with lived experience. So now that we know why we need a leadership academy, what should actually be taught in a leadership academy for individuals with disabilities? And what are the perspectives and priorities of those individuals with lived experience? So to gather that information, we sent out a needs assessment. And a needs assessment is basically a survey that says, what are your needs? What's important to you? And this needs assessment had topics that were related to self-advocacy, disability policy, and employment. And this was sent out to our California state and community partners. We pulled these topics from Partners in Policymaking, which is a free online program that's designed to teach people with disabilities and their families about advocacy and policymaking. So we pulled all those topics. And then we also pulled topics from literature review and some of our work through our various Tarjan affiliated programs. We then reached out to our community and state and federal partners and said to send this out to their networks. The topics were then rated from 1 to 5, 1 being not very important and 5 being very, very important. And then we also asked the respondents to select their most and least important topics. So by asking what's important in these 2 different ways, it gave us a better sense of what was actually important. Right? So we did the ratings, and then we also selected what's most important and what's less important. And then these data were collected from April to July 2023. So we're really able to gather some good data here. In terms of demographics, our respondents included 88 total people, about 28.4 identified as being autistic, and then the average age was 30 years with a standard deviation of almost 8. So quite a big spread here. The median age was 28 years, and then the overall range in ages was from 19 to 54 years. We had quite a bit of range in the ages of the respondents. In terms of gender breakdown, we had about 48% identified as being female, 40% identified as being male, 8% stated that they were non-binary, and then 4% preferred not to answer. Our race and ethnicity breakdown included about 60% identified as being white, 17% as Hispanic or Latino, and then 7% each identified as being either Asian, Black, or preferred not to answer, and then 3% identified as being multiple ethnicities. So we had quite a big spread across across age, gender, and race and ethnicity. We also wanted to know about our respondents' own advocacy experience, right? If we're creating a leadership academy, we wanted to know what's your own background with advocacy? And we had quite a range as well. So about 40% said that they had no previous leadership or advocacy experience. Another 40% said that they were currently serving on a committee, board, or council. And then 20% said that they had previously served but were not at the moment. In terms of years of experience, again, we had quite a big range here, ranging from 20% saying that they had 0 years of advocacy experience, all the way up to 10% saying that they had between 5 to 10 years of experience. So again, lots of differences in experience on advocacy. In terms of the needs assessment results, well, we had some pretty nice results. All of the self-advocacy and disability policy topics received high ratings. So all of the average scores on the topics were greater than 4. And if you remember, all of the topics are rated from 1 to 5. So all of them were pretty important. The highest rated topics are here on the left. They included self-advocacy, understanding and making a change, interviewing skills, and then requesting workplace accommodations. And then the lowest rated topics here on the right included creating resumes, public policy making, disclosing diagnoses and conditions, and then transformational leadership. Since we also did rankings, we looked at what percentage of respondents rated these topics as the highest and then the lowest. So 75% said that self-advocacy was a most important topic. This tells us, yep, we want to include this information. And then 52% rated transformational leadership as the least important topic. And transformational leadership is information on a leadership style that encourages people to be innovative and to create meaningful change. And we included this from our literature review and some of our other social skills work groups. So the conclusion of our needs assessment said, yeah, there's strong support for the creation of a leadership academy. And then the topics that are the most important to include are self-advocacy and understanding and making a change. So basically, we want to teach knowledge and skills related to disability policy and advocacy. Okay, so back to our questions. What should be taught in a leadership academy? And what are the perspectives and priorities? Well, we want to prioritize self-advocacy and understanding and making a change. All right, now we're going to move into how we actually made this curriculum. So I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Warner.
Thank you. All right, so returning back to that mantra of nothing about us without us, we got a good sense of the needs and the, I would say, hunger for this type of leadership curriculum. But we also wanted to think about how we could include individuals with lived experience throughout the process of creating the Leadership Academy, and throughout the academy itself. So we'll talk a little bit about collaboration strategies here on the next slide. So we think it's really important to involve individuals with lived experience from the start, rather than pulling people in the middle of a process. So as you saw, we really took the needs of the community at their face value in creating our Leadership Academy. We also think it's important to include individuals with lived experience at every step of the process. So we didn't want to just end with that needs assessment and say, okay, now we have what we need. Thank you for your time. We wanted to include individuals with lived experience throughout the process. And one of the ways that we did that was to really prioritize accessibility and inclusivity. So as you can imagine, disability rights history and advocacy topics could really be dense and have a lot of information involved. And so we wanted to make sure that our content was accessible and inclusive. So it was really important to lean on the experiences of those with lived experience as we were creating the content. And it's not enough to just value someone's time. Of course, we are very appreciative of the work that everyone has done and goes into this process. It's really important, though, to also make sure we're compensating for contributions. So we wanted to make sure we're paying people for their time, and we're lucky enough to have some wonderful staff with lived experience who are able to help us out. And then, of course, we want to gather and act on feedback. So we'll talk at the end of our presentation on some sort of next steps, what the next steps or what the information about the first round of the Leadership Academy has taught us and how we're going to implement that feedback. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific ways that we engaged with this collaborative process. So here we have the pictures of some of our wonderful co-leaders and individuals with lived experience: Holly Oliver, Keisha Weller, and Wesley Witherspoon. And you'll hear from Holly and Keisha in a bit here in our presentation. But the way that we included partners with lived experience was, as I mentioned, in accessibility. So we created some content partnering with Holly and Keisha and Wesley and others, just to make sure that what we were teaching made sense and was accessible to those who we were trying to teach. They also helped select speakers. You'll hear from Jasper later on some of our speakers. We didn't just pick people we wanted. We wanted to make sure that the individuals who were involved in the Leadership Academy with lived experience were able to have speakers who they were excited about. This also included helping out with visuals too, making sure that all types of learners were able to engage with our materials. And then in addition to creating the content, we also had individuals with lived experience co-lead the sessions. We used those topics from our needs assessment in the sessions, but really we relied on the lived experience and the expertise of the individuals who you see here on your screen to be able to help us teach the topics we were teaching about. You heard Jasper talk about our positionality, and we can only go so far as individuals who don't have intellectual or developmental disabilities. And so we really relied on collaborating with our individuals with lived experience as we were going through the process of the Leadership Academy. And so to kind of return back to that question of what are ways to include individuals with lived experience when making training curriculum, all the time, nothing about us without us. So before the process, during the process, and after the process, all the time, we always want to include individuals with lived experience. All right, I will turn it back over to Dr. Estabillo to talk about what the Leadership Academy is.
All right, thank you, Blake. So now that we have all of this information from our needs assessment and we've integrated individuals with lived experience into every single step, now it brings us to our current Leadership Academy. So what is the UCLA Leadership Academy for Emerging Disability Rights Leaders? Well, it was a 10-week program that we created in collaboration with individuals with lived experience. And it was offered for 2-hour sessions on Zoom each week. And so we really focused on different topics related to disability history, government, and advocacy skills like self-advocacy, testifying, and storytelling. And we split up our sessions on, the first half was a didactic where Dr. Warner or one of our other collaborators, Dr. Rosana, presented on, one of these topics here, disability history or government. And then the second half, we had a guest speaker, which I'll talk about in the next slide. In addition to the didactic presentation, we also provided a lot of coaching and skills practice. So this is really focused on how do we not only know what this knowledge is, the disability policy and advocacy knowledge, but this gets into the skills piece. And we'll talk a little bit more about skills in a couple of slides. But in the 2-hour sessions, we focused on a specific session topic and then gave lots of coaching and practice. Our wonderful speakers, which we were so lucky to have a different guest speaker each week, were individuals with lived experience who also have a lot of advocacy experience. So we had, some of the people included Jim Lebrecht, who is the co-director of CRIP Camp, if you're familiar with that. Kayla McKeon, who is the first registered lobbyist on Capitol Hill with Down syndrome. And wonderful other community activists and individuals with lived experience like Rodrigo and Julie Gaona, Sabrina Epstein, Dika McLean, Don Rudolph, and Russell Lehman. We had lots of really wonderful guest speakers to really speak directly to their experience as an individual with a disability and also their advocacy experience. Okay, I'm going to hand things back over to Blake to talk about the skills piece.
Thank you. Yes, I was starstruck every week when we had some of those wonderful speakers, some of the big names in disability policy and advocacy. All right, so talking about the Leadership Academy skills, one of the things we noticed was that introductions happen in almost any meeting you'll be in. We, of course, started our lecture off with introductions, and so that's one of the skills we focused on. And then, of course, we also talked about advocacy, professional advocacy, how we can advocate for ourselves, as well as wider topics and issues. And the way that we did this was through the Tell Your Story model, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But we can hopefully see this graphic of a triangle that very conveniently spells out the word tell through TEL, trustworthiness, emotion, and logic. And so what we started out with when we're talking about the TEL model is really asking the question of what do I want? There's a lot of different topics that are involved in disability policy and advocacy. And although our program was pretty general, we wanted our fellows, the individuals with lived experience who are engaging in the Leadership Academy, to be able to really tailor it to their own experience and things that they were passionate about. So we started off with this question of what do I want? And so, topics ranged from a lot of different bills that were around or maybe some more specific topic area. But whenever we're thinking about what do we want, we also have to think about how do we get that? And the way that we can think about how we get it is through the TEL model. So these 3 pieces that I'll walk through, the T, the E, and the L, come from Greek philosophy. If you're familiar with Aristotle, these 3 pieces are important whenever we're telling a persuasive story. So if our goal is to advocate, we're going to tell our story in a persuasive way. It involves these 3 elements. The first is trustworthiness. If you are familiar with Aristotle, this is the ethos or the ethical appeal. And we know that people really listen to us when they get to know us. It's a lot easier to connect with people and tell our story when they get to know us. So that's the skill we really focused on in this part of the TEL model is introductions, introducing ourselves, who we are, kind of our background, any qualifications we have to really give us credibility and have people understand who we are, why we're bringing this to the table. The next piece is the E, emotion, pathos, if you're familiar with Aristotle. And we know that people really listen to us and they care about when they care about what we're saying. So it's not enough to just give facts and figures. You might zone out. I know I zone out sometimes when I just see facts and figures. So it's important to include some stories, right? Our personal story, why something matters, give a name and a face to an issue rather than just the broad issue. So the skill we worked on here was really just storytelling, having our fellows talk about why an issue is important to them, how it affects their lives in particular, or those around them. And then finally, we wanted to focus on logic, the L of the TEL model. This is logos if you're fluent in Greek. And this is really just the idea that people listen to us also when we have facts and figures to support our thoughts. So we really went through and researched our topics and had our individuals with lived experience, our fellows, include logic in their stories as well. So by including all three of those pieces, introducing themselves, having a personal narrative or story attached, as well as some facts to back up the issue, is the method we went about to tell our stories. And then the way that this culminated was in a Leadership Academy showcase in which the fellows presented their advocacy topic using the TEL model, like I just described. So introducing who they are, why an issue is important to them, some personal information, as well as those facts and figures. We also invited all of our state and federal partners to attend. And it's just an exciting culmination of all of the work that our wonderful fellows have been doing. And they even went on, some of them have been telling their story to legislators and other advocacy organizations and groups, and really spreading their passion in a lot of different ways. So returning back to that question then of what is the UCLA Leadership Academy for Emerging Disability Rights Leaders? And in short, it's really a program to teach individuals with lived experience, knowledge and skills related to disability policy and advocacy. And let's talk a little bit about the results. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Estabillo.
Thank you, Blake. All right, so we've talked about the background, we talked about the Leadership Academy itself and some of the skills that we taught. So now we want to know, was this helpful? So what are the results of the UCLA Leadership Academy for Emerging Disability Rights Leaders? So in total, we recruited fellows throughout our network. So through the Tarjan Center, our partners and collaborators at USC, CHLA, UCED, the UC Davis Mind Institute, DDS, or the Department of Developmental Services, and UCLA Pathway. So we reached out to our collaborators there, and then they nominated potential fellows, which were either students or people who they worked with who had shown some interest in advocacy. So they were nominated, and then we accepted them into the program. 10 total fellows enrolled, and they ranged in age from 20 years to 45 years old. And they also had a range of disabilities, including autism, intellectual disability, Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy. So we had a range of individuals across age and disability status. After the program, we then sent out a survey, which really evaluated the program. And so these were sent out to the fellows, and we asked questions related to feasibility, which is this program doable? And acceptability, meaning, did we like it? Or what are the things that we want to improve? So we asked a lot of questions on the Leadership Academy content related to the knowledge that we taught, the skills that we taught, as well as the structure and the curriculum itself. Because we really were just building this program as we were teaching it, and we really wanted to get some feedback from our fellows on how we can improve it for future years. So the demographic breakdown, we had about 55% of the respondents identified as being female, 36% identified as being male, and then 9% identified as non-binary. Our race and ethnicity breakdown included about 37% identified as Asian, 27% each identified as being Black or white, and then 9% preferred not to answer. So we had quite a range in our gender and race breakdowns. Of the 10 fellows that enrolled, 9 of them ultimately graduated. So we did have one drop. The average age of the fellows was 26 years old with a standard deviation of about 7.5 years. And then 7 of those fellows attended at least 8 of the sessions. So we knew that they had enough experience with the Leadership Academy to give us good feedback. 6 of those fellows ultimately completed the program evaluation survey. So we have very, very small numbers here, but we really wanted to just get some feedback on this program and how we can improve on it for the future. So based on the results of those 6 respondents, we had some really nice results, which is always nice to see. So 100% of our respondents, meaning 6 of those 6, either agreed or strongly agreed that their disability policy and advocacy knowledge increased. So these were questions related to saying things like, I know more about the history of the disability rights movement. So all of them said yes. They also know more about advocacy, testifying, the role of government in politics, storytelling, and then advocacy and practice. So all of them said, yep, I know a lot more about disability policy and advocacy. We asked them about skills as well, and 100% of them agreed or strongly agreed that their disability policy and advocacy skills improved. So these are the skills that Dr. Warner had just mentioned. So their ability to introduce themselves in 10 seconds or less, right? Just a quick introduction. Their ability to introduce themselves in 30 seconds or less, so providing a little bit more information. Their ability to advocate for topics that are important to them, and then their ability to tell their story using the TEL model. So all of our respondents said, yes, my ability to enact all of these skills has improved. In addition, we asked those questions related to the Leadership Academy structure and curriculum, and all of them agreed or strongly agreed that the structure and curriculum was helpful. So they said things like the information presented was helpful, that they were satisfied with the topics that were presented. So we selected the good ones from the needs assessment. They said that they would apply the information and skills to their daily life, which I think is really reassuring. The materials were presented in an understandable way, which is very important for us, right? Especially since we got lots of feedback and support from our individuals with lived experience to ensure that our materials were accessible. They also said that the Leadership Academy was well organized, and that the speakers and the coaches were helpful. So all around, we're getting positive results about the knowledge, content knowledge, the skills, and the structure and curriculum for the Leadership Academy. Additionally, we got some other qualitative responses, just so that way we can know other ways that might be helpful to improve the Leadership Academy. So 33% of the respondents said that they were interested in learning more about current disability rights topics. So in addition to learning about disability history and policy and storytelling, they really wanted to know what's going on right now and what are the things that are relevant to me that I should have on my mind. And so we thought that that was really important to teach very timely current disability rights topics for the future. 33% also said that they were interested in self-advocacy in the workplace or classroom. So really wanting to learn how to apply self-advocacy in the spaces that they're interacting with others in, either at work or at school. 83% also ranked the session advocacy and practice as one as the most helpful. So we asked them to say which sessions were the most helpful, and 83% said advocacy and practice was the most helpful. And this was a session that was really focused on practical skills. So how do I contact my representative? How do I even look up that information? Right? So very, very practical, concrete skills on how do we practice advocacy. And that was rated as a most helpful session. I have here next a couple quotes from our fellows here. So my main goal is to become a disability advocacy leader in my workplace. And then somebody else said, I would like to learn what leadership means. And so we really wanted to, teach those leadership and advocacy skills. Okay, I'm going to hand things back over to Dr. Warner, and we'll talk about our fellow and our coach's experience.
All right. In the full experience of Nothing About Us Without Us, we also wanted to include some experiences from our fellows, our previous fellows, as well as our coaches. So we have a couple of videos that we're going to share with you. The first is from Holly Oliver, who is one of our previous fellows, and she'll talk about her experience with the Leadership Academy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Holly. I want to share with you my experience with the UCLA Tarjan Center Lend Leadership Academy. I was a member of the first cohort of the Leadership Academy. I was honored to do so, and it was exciting to learn more advocacy skills. One of the focus areas of the Academy was to learn disability rights. I learned some things through the partners in policymaking, but this was definitely more in depth. The cohort saw individuals like me who were interested in doing this kind of work, which was very inspiring. We got to work with like minds on different topics we were interested in and how to use the TEL model, trustworthy, emotional, and logical model to tell stories related to those topics. It's hard to live in a world where things are just not designed for people with disabilities. There are still accessibility issues that need to be worked on. Everyone should know about disability rights history. In the Leadership Academy, we got to see the movie Crip Camp, and it was nice that the co-director, Jim Lebrecht, got to be there. We got to talk about what happened during the early years of 504 and before the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. That was impactful, but Jim continued to encourage the younger generation because he's one of the few people in that movie still alive. Jim was pushing for people to move the next generation to advocate for disability rights because people don't realize what people like Jim had to go through. They didn't know about the sit-ins. They didn't realize that people in wheelchairs literally had to climb up the stairs just to get the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. I think people don't realize how difficult they really had it back then. There's still work that needs to be done. One of my responsibilities was to edit the material to make sure it was accessible and in plain language, including people with disabilities, creating programs like the Leadership Academy, which helps make the materials more relatable and easier to understand. Leadership groups currently have an older crowd of people, individuals that have disabilities that have been doing this their whole lives. Still, there's not enough of a younger generation to inspire the next steps of what could be done. The UCLA Tarjan Center Leadership Academy can help younger advocates to become emerging leaders.
Right. Thank you to Holly for sharing her experiences in both helping develop as well as participate in the Leadership Academy. And we're lucky enough to have her stay on with us and to continue to help us out with the Leadership Academy. So thanks to Holly. And I also wanted to share a video of one of our co-instructors and coaches from the previous academy, Keisha Weller. So Keisha will share her experience being a coach.
My name is Keisha Weller. I am a senior disability rights advocate for the UCLA Tarjan Center. I am a person who has IDD and a co-facilitator for the UCLA Leadership Academy for emerging disability rights leaders. One of my tasks as a Leadership Academy co-facilitator was to review the curriculum to help decide what topics were important for the emerging disability rights leaders. I also attended weekly team meetings where we discussed the logistics of the academy. One of my fondest memories is to co-lead different sessions with Wesley Witherspoon during the Leadership Academy classes. I also helped lead breakout room discussions with the fellows. We know that people with IED have a capacity to learn about many different topics and become leaders. It is important to work with individuals with IED in developing programs that are designed for us. We are the experts in our own experience. We know what we need. Nothing matters without us.
All right, you heard it again, nothing about us without us. Once again, just thank you to Keisha for sharing her experiences and really highlighting the importance of working with individuals with lived experience and in creating and leading these leadership academies. I think, I learned so much from Keisha and our other co-leaders. So I'm very grateful for their continued collaboration and in our efforts. So to kind of return back to our question of what are the results of the UCLA Leadership Academy for emerging disability rights leaders, And that is, in short, that it is helpful for teaching knowledge and skills related to disability policy and advocacy. All right, so that's a little bit about the program, and we'll kind of end on the question of what is next for the UCLA Leadership Academy for emerging disability rights leaders. So for some of our future directions, we've learned a lot through our program and through the first pancake, as you might say. And one of the things that we would include is to introduce the skills a little bit earlier and to give more structured support. This was asked for both by the coaches that we were working with as well as our participants. And so one of the things we'll be doing is assigning leadership coaches and our new role of senior fellows for each of our fellows. So this time around, we'll have our leadership coaches who are there to be practicing the skills and working with our fellows. We also are inviting some of our fellows back from the previous cohort to be senior fellows and talk about their own lived experience. So we'll be partnering with those individuals and working together through a new coaching academy. So before the Leadership Academy is starting, actually starting this Friday, we'll have a coaching academy where we'll walk through how to be an effective coach and how to help individuals who are going through our program to be as successful as they can. And then one other thing that we'll do earlier on is to include content on current disability policy topics. Some of our individuals come in ready to go and have something in mind that they want to advocate for, or some part of the TEL model that they really want to focus on. But others may not know the landscape and know what's happening in current events. And so they might want a little more information on some current policy topics that are out there related to disabilities. So to kind of answer the question once again in brief, what's next for the Academy? We have a lot planned. Be on the lookout, stay tuned. And we'll end here with some conclusions before we answer some questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Warner. So to wrap things up, we got lots of really good feedback from our fellows, and we learned that the Leadership Academy is both feasible and acceptable for individuals with lived experience, and it really highlights the importance of teaching skills related to disability policy and advocacy. So we've done many steps along the way to fully integrate individuals with lived experience, and we also continue to enact that as we refine the curriculum and think about how we're expanding it with the next cohort and the coaching academy. So we're really looking forward to sharing and talking more about how we can expand the Leadership Academy. A couple thank yous before we wrap up. So to our wonderful fellows, all of our speakers, and our leadership coaches. Big thank you to Keisha Weller, Wesley Witherspoon, and Holly Oliver for all of their work in giving us feedback on every step. To our collaborators at the UC LEN, Doctors Keisha Rosenaw and Alice Kuo, and our state and federal partners like the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, Disability Rights California, the UC Davis Mind Institute, and USC CHLA's USAID. And then special thank you to Elsa Cingione, who is our wonderful predoctoral psychology intern who analyzed a lot of this data and who is a very big part of the next cohort. All right, here's some contact information to our audience. You can reach both myself and Dr. Warner directly. If you want to stay up to date on the Leadership Academy, we have an email address at the tarjan-lend@mednet.ucla.edu just to get more information. But to stay up to date on not only the Leadership Academy, but all of the goings on at the Tarjan Center, I encourage you to follow us on social media at UCLA Tarjan Center, and you can stay up to date on all of our activities there. All right, so I'm going to stop my screen share here, and then maybe we can open things up for questions.
Well, wonderful presentation. A big thanks to Dr. Estabillo and Dr. Warner for this really nice overview of the UCLA Leadership Academy for emerging disability rights leaders. Also want to again highlight all the important collaborative efforts from our colleagues, at UC Lend, including Dr. Keisha Rosenaw and Dr. Alice Kuo. It's just been such a pleasure partnering with the UC Lend program along with all of our federal partners. So just to get us started, I have a little bit of a personal question for both of you. Wondering if you would be interested in telling your story about how you got involved with disability policy and why you believe advocacy is so important.
Thank you, Dr. Lageson, for that question. I actually stumbled upon disability policy and advocacy work by accident, not by choice. I did my graduate training in Louisiana, and my first year of grad school, my funding placement, so how I got funded for my graduate degree was to do research with the State Department of Health and Human Services. So I was working in the Department of Health doing a lot of data crunching in a state where there's very different landscapes of services. Medicaid waivers look very different, and the early intervention programs look very different. So that really sparked my interest on the intersections of clinical work, research, and then very importantly, the role of policy in how we can support individuals with disabilities. So that's where I was really introduced into disability policy. And then I was lucky enough to, match here for my internship training and be a part of the Tarjan Center and to learn more about how, academic researchers and clinicians can play a role on policy making and decision making processes. That's a little bit about what brought me to this role. That Dr. Warner, if you'd like to share your experiences too, I'm sure our audience would love to hear.
I'd love to. Actually, we have kind of sister experiences here, Jasper. So as I mentioned, or it was in my bio, I was a LEND trainee in South Dakota. And as part of that traineeship, we got to go to the state capitol and see the legislative process in action. And I think for a lot of us, it's kind of a cloak and dagger mystery sort of situation, not always familiar with how the process works. And so to see the process in action of really just people who are legislators. And just a hint to you all, legislators are just people too. So getting to go and see how someone can go up and put their name on the list to testify and share their own experiences really opened my eyes. I think it was intimidating to think about even going forward and advocating or talking about experiences. And so seeing that it's as simple as showing up and that anyone can do it really sparked my interest. And I saw a lot of policies happening and things that I could contribute to, or the people I was working with lived experience might be able to contribute to. And so that's really what kind of sparked my interest in the advocacy process. And then being like Jasper said, I also matched here for my my internship. And so seeing the role of the UCED as broadening what a psychologist can do, I think really helped as well. So I'm very grateful for the Tarjan Center for expanding our views on psychology.
Well, thank you both for sharing those personal reflections on how you sort of stumbled apparently into the field according to how Dr. Estabillo described it. I think that's such a good example too of sort of trying new things and living outside of your comfort zone, and you'll never know where that's going to take you. So we're really grateful that we have the pleasure of working with you in this important area here at the Tarjan Center. We're getting lots of great questions in the Q&A. So if you do have questions for Dr. Estabillo or Dr. Warner, please feel free to add them to the Q&A on the Zoom toolbar. Another question that's coming up relates to wanting to hear a little bit more about the TEL model. And specifically too, is the TEL model only for advocating to legislators?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in here. So another little piece of my background here is that I was a competitive speaker in high school and in my undergrad. And the category that I was in was called Great Speeches, in which we analyzed a speech from history. And so that's really where this idea of Aristotle and the modes of persuasion, or ethos, pathos, and logos came from. And I think the short answer to that question would be no, it's not just for legislators. Anytime that we're having some sort of message that we want to get across and maybe a bit more of a persuasive message, the TEL model can come into place. So I don't know, even if you want to get out of your chores, maybe talking about your own personal experience and adding some facts behind it can be an effective way to get something done. So I think could be happening in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to be a large scale sort of I'm advocating for disability policy to legislators. It could be as something like talking to your boss about a certain issue, or self-advocating at an IEP meeting. There's a lot of different ways where I think the TEL model can come into place.
I guess this is actually a good segue then for the next question, which is, will this research study be expanded to include additional participants in the future, even outside of neurodevelopmental disabilities or IDD? Maybe
I can
Jasper.
jump in. Sure. I think the hope is yes. We're currently working on, next steps for the Leadership Academy and reaching out to our partners. So stay tuned. We would love to cast a wide net and to enroll, anyone and everyone. But at this point, it's still a baby project. So if you want to stay up to date on future cohorts or what we're doing with the program, again, I encourage you to follow us on social media or to be on our mailing list. That's the best way to see what we're doing and how things are going with all of our work. But at this point, we're staying kind of small just because we gotta keep our researcher hats on and making sure that we're really doing the work in supporting individuals with advocacy and disability work.
I do see though how the TEL model really is sort of it's transferable to kind of any sort of person who's looking to advocate for themselves or for, a policy.
Absolutely. It's worked for 3,000 years. We can, don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we just repackaged that with the TEL acronym. Another important question is coming up here related to, this is actually from one of our faculty, Dr. Lauren Clark, is asking one important part of advocacy and cross disability solidarity. And so she's asking how you see that working into the Leadership Academy.
I think I can jump in here. I love this question. So thank you, Dr. Clark, for a wonderful question here. I think I'm going to start off by saying that in the Leadership Academy, we really lean heavily into the group cohesion in the very start. And so we do things like small group work so that way the fellows can get to know each other. We also have them do icebreakers at the beginning so that way they can get to know each other on an individual level. And I think just anecdotally, in my reflections on how the cohesion changed over time, we really saw that, our fellows were typing into the chat lots of words of support for each other, and, commenting to each other. And just really, supporting each other and telling their own stories. I think at the very end with the leadership showcase, we definitely saw that where it wasn't just, one group and another group based on their own diagnosis, but really that they were all fellows in this together, and had learned these wonderful skills. So I think to answer the question, yes, cross disability solidarity is very important. Right. And I think that wasn't one of our main goals in the Leadership Academy, but we certainly saw that and saw what an important role that solidarity played in teaching advocacy skills. But Blake, I don't know if you had other things to add to about that question.
Yeah, I think part of that too goes back to disability rights history, and we start off our program talking about disability rights history, and so things are not by any means siloed when you think about disability rights and the history of everything. And that even goes with sometimes we think of IDD and intellectual and developmental disabilities and physical disabilities as, separate containers or separate areas, but really it's all together when we're, advocating and focusing on different topics. And so going back and seeing some of the huge names in disability history, Judy Heumann, as someone with a physical disability, we see things across the board. And I think that really helps with that solidarity, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, thank you so much for these important reflections. There's a lot of questions right now in the Q&A about the next steps. So one of our attendees is asking how someone with a lived experience can get involved in the program. Specifically, they have an adult child who's struggling with getting their needs met at their college and needs help with advocacy. There's also just a lot of general questions about, how do we enroll? When is the next cohort? So maybe you could just share a little bit about what the next steps are. I know you highlighted this a little bit in your talk, but if you could talk about what's happening more immediately and also in the future, which directions do you see the Leadership Academy going in? And maybe both of you could kind of reflect on that. Maybe we could start with Dr. Warner.
Sure. So in short, I'll answer the question about what's happening immediately. So as we mentioned, our kind of newest addition to the Leadership Academy is a more specific coaching academy And that starts on Friday. So we are starting training our coaches and senior fellows who are last year's fellows contributing this year. And they'll start on Friday with a 5-week course on how to be effective coaches so that they can be the best they can be during our Leadership Academy. We're also in the process of recruiting for our Leadership Academy. So we're just about done recruiting the next cohort. However, we know there is some kind of significant interest. So maybe I'll let Dr. Estabillo kind of talk about how you can get connected with us for those interested.
Thanks, Blake. Yes, so for anyone interested, you can reach out to our Tarjan email address. I think I'll put that up in just a couple moments, or reaching out to our direct Tarjan Center email address just to stay up to date. You can indicate your interest, and then we can have a running waiting list, so that way you can stay up to date and learn about next steps. Again, the hope is really to expand this Leadership Academy, to continue to refine it, get feedback from individuals with lived experience in the community, because as we know, needs change. And we started off with a needs assessment, and that very well might change with every cohort and iteration of this Leadership Academy. And so we're listening. We're really hoping to center the views of individuals with lived experience on this Leadership Academy. But again, email us directly, get on our mailing list, and that's the best way to stay up to date on recruitment and future cohorts.
Again, nothing about us without us. So it's going to be an ever evolving process, this Leadership Academy, trying to meet the needs of our emerging leaders. So I thank you both so much for your important leadership in developing and disseminating this program to our community. And we're excited to share more about the Leadership Academy with you over the coming years. In the meantime, I want to just take a moment to thank our speakers, to Dr. Estabillo and to Dr. Warner, for taking time out of their busy schedules to share this important work with our community. And thank you to all of you who have attended today's distinguished lecture. I hope that you can also join us for our UCLA Tarjan Center Research and Resource Exchange. Summer Rose Perry is going to be sharing some research opportunities just in a few moments related to the eMERGE research study, which stands for Early Markers of Expressive and Receptive Language. You'll be able to ask Summer questions about the study and how to get more involved. So we hope you will enjoy this opportunity and join us for the Research and Resource Exchange. Once again, thank you so much to Dr. Estabillo and to Dr. Warner. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Great. All right, so I am actually going to switch hats now from our lecture presenter to our moderator. I'm going to invite Summer Rose Perry, who Dr. Lageson mentioned is a research associate in Dr. Connie Casri's lab at the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment, and she'll be sharing about some research opportunities that our audience might be interested in. All right, I'm going to hand things over to you, Summer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Estabillo, for that introduction and passing off. You guys did an amazing presentation. I'm Summer Rose, as they said, and I'm the study coordinator for the Casri Lab here at UCLA. And I will be presenting our newest study, eMERGE, which stands for the Early Markers of Expressive and Receptive Language within Children with Autism. So let's get started. So to start off, our study is aiming to explore the language and developmental language within autistic children between the ages of 18 and 30 months old by using those neural and behavioral approaches at different time points that I'll go into in further slides. Parents with children with autism often cite that the language delay is the first indicator that makes them go out and search for that educational and medical assistance and advice. And studies have found that prior to the 24 months of age, infants with autism are nonverbal, but around that 24 to 36 month period, that's where they see the language trajectories diverge over time. And that's the time frame that we are looking and studying the children for, to see if we can see those early markers and that diversion happen in real time. And I must mention that this is a free intervention here at UCLA. So to get into that enrollment criteria, we are looking for infants that are of 18 months old to 21 months old. And that is our first time point. So it's very crucial that they fit within that time period. And we're looking for children that do have a diagnosis. It's preferred, but it is not required. We are definitely taking into account parental concern for their child not having a speech delay or a developmental delay, because we know at that early age, it is very hard to get a diagnosis. So we are being compassionate and accepting to all. The whole purpose of this study is to be as inclusive as we can. And we do not want to send anybody away just because they don't have that formal diagnosis. I've had my own niece and nephew in this study, and they didn't have a formal diagnosis, but they did get one over time. And this kind of helped kickstart and show us those signs that it was time for them to go look into resources that they could use. And then lastly, this is a study that requires families to be in the greater Los Angeles area, only because luckily we are coming to the home to do all these assessments. So there's no need to come out to UCLA, but for the consistency of our team to make sure we're able to meet those time points, we want to make sure the families are within reach. So moving forward to the timeline of the study. So it's 3 time points where we are checking in and visiting families. First one being that 18 to 21 month mark that I mentioned beforehand. And then we're gonna circle back at the 24 to 27 month period. And lastly, at the 30 to 33 month age period. So at each time point, assessments are done, ranging from language measures, EEG, and a natural language sample. Again, all completed within your home. Within the time point periods, an ADOS will be done, and a Lena vest will be provided to the family. That is a child-safe audio recorder that picks up sounds, including language that the child is exposed to in the home, to give us an idea of that language word count that can play into their language development themselves. And then lastly, an EEG is taken to determine if we see any neural markers. And as you see in this picture, that is our portable system. Again, we're really promoting the accessibility of this study. So this is the same kind of setup that you would have within the lab, obviously not as small and petite, but it is something that we can take to you, and the validity of the data has been proven to be the same. So you are getting the same resources and high tech resources that you would get here at UCLA. So if we go out to you, don't worry of like, oh, does this work at home? Is this the same? Is it going to have the same effect? It is totally shows that it's validity and consistent data through and through. So you are getting the same exact services in the home. And then some benefits, besides it being in the home, participants will receive a total of $375 by the end of the study. First time point, they'll receive $100. Second time point, $125 participating, and then time point 3, $150. Totaling up, again, $375, which doesn't sound too bad. And that's all from us, all cash. Just to say thank you for being willing to let us in your home and let us see your child and your baby. And I know that it might be a little nerve-wracking to have strangers come in your home, but we really do appreciate you guys. This data really plays a huge role into the community. We're trying to make research as accessible as possible, and this is one step closer to that goal. And then I want to take a moment to really go into how participants benefit from the study by receiving detailed information about their child's language and communication skills. Again, I mentioned beforehand, at this young of an age, it's hard to get that diagnosis. So this is one thing that you could take to your pediatrician and say, hey, I've already put my child in this. Can we do further evaluation? Are there any resources that I can get from you guys or the regional center? Or if you don't know who to go to for that, we can point you in the right direction. And each time point is about, each time point is about 9 hours long. And don't worry, I know that sounds super intense, but each of those hours can be split up over a 2 to 3 day period, emphasizing why it's so important that you're in the LA area. So it's easier for the team to coordinate with the families. So lastly, here's my contact information, our number to the CASRI lab, and our email. My email's at the bottom, as well as our lab manager. If you have any participants in mind, any more questions for me, or if you want to stay connected with our future studies. And that'll be all for me. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Summer, for that presentation. Maybe we'll leave the slide up here for our audience to just have your contact information. I'm going to start getting into Q&A. So to our audience, please continue to input your questions for Summer and the Emerge study into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll facilitate. But I'll go ahead and start things off. Summer, I noticed those cute little caps on those babies. What is an EEG, and what are we looking at when doing an EEG study like this?
So an EEG is looking at the neural detectors. The long name, I'm so sorry, I can't tell you right now, but I'm not the lead EEG tech. Our EEG tech is Abby. She's brilliant, and she has been doing a lot of studies over the years. And this is the first one where we're looking at babies. And like I listed before, this is a crucial time within that language developmental period for the children. So seeing those early neural markers would be so great for families to know and take that information back, and to see if we can see any brain behavior changes through the EEG.
So I think my understanding, right, is that EEG, which I also don't know the very long acronym, but it really measures the electrical activity in the brain. It's non-invasive, right? The babies are, it's not going to hurt them. They don't feel anything. It looks just like it does, like a cute little swim cap with those wires. And it really is measuring the electrical activity in the brain when they're doing different activities. Right? And so what are the activities that they would be doing as part of this study?
So there's some behavioral assessments that we look at. There's some child and a parent or caregiver interaction assessments that we look at. And then I mentioned Lena Vest, which is the language recorder that helps us pick up those measured language outcomes to see if it matches up with what the child is picking up, because a lot of children who are learning how to speak, who are nonverbal that young, often learn by repetition. So we want to see how much frequency is going on within the home to see if that helps the child boost the language outcome over time.
And just to remind us again what some of the time points are, what are the ages that we're looking for the kids that we're recruiting?
So the first time point is that 18 to 21 1 month period where we start. And then the second one is 24 to 27 months. And then lastly, 30 to 33 months old. But we have to make sure they're in the first 18 to 21 month mark so we can begin and have a consistent follow through within each time point.
Great. Okay, so I think the ask for our audience is any toddlers that you know of who might be eligible right before that 18-month mark. You could reach out or send them information about this research study. That would be very helpful. And then each time point is like a follow-up. So we'll want to make sure that we're tracking these little ones over time.
Yes, they're so cute in their little caps, and we're always so happy to see the babies. We have another study that's similar, and we've started that one at 6 months, and we finally reached the 1 year mark for a lot of them, and to see their growth over time, it's like I feel like I'm in the family with them. So this is going to be similar. It's really exciting to see the change over time.
Yeah. I think it's always interesting for families too to get tracking data over time. As a, putting on my clinician hat now, many of the families that I work with say, that doing all of these assessments just really gives you such rich data on every single step, and you can come back to it, and you're able to celebrate every milestone and achievement, and really just get such rich data on every single step of development for your kiddos. Great. All right. And so I think, again, audience, if there are other questions that you have for Summer, please type them into the Q&A. Other things, Summer, in terms of next steps or other things about the Emerge study that you think would be important for our audience to learn about today?
Next steps, just reach out to the contact information provided. We're very timely. I'm always on my email, so you will hear back from me very fast. And within that period of contacting, confirming that the child meets the time point period age range, we will get scheduled to go out to you within a week or two tops, and then that's when we'll begin the study. As far as Emerge, we just want to emphasize once again that everything is done in your home. You do not need to come out to UCLA. We know how hard it is for families to take time off of work, find transportation, and we want to alleviate any stressors on the families as much as possible, so we come all to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Summer, for presenting on the eMERGE study and the wonderful work you're doing in the CASRI lab. Audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Summer at her email address or the contact information that's on the screen. To our audience, again, thank you so much for attending our lecture today. It's always a pleasure. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us at the Tarjan Center. And then we look forward to seeing you all next month on March 10th for our March lecture series. All right, have a good day, everyone. Bye now.
You guys.